Given her acceptance speech for the Nobel Peace Prize, 21 years after it was awarded. Aung San Suu Kyi is in Norway on her first European visit after almost 2 decades of detention by the Burmese military authorities. Well, in her speech, she said that the award helped her get through a time of intense isolation.
During my days of house arrest, it felt as though I were no longer a part of the real world. There was a house which was my world. There was the world of others who also were not free, but who were together in prison as a community. And there was the world of the free. Each one was a different planet, pursuing its own separate course in an indifferent universe. What the Nobel Peace Prize did was to draw me once again into the world of other human beings outside the isolated area in which I lived, to restore a sense of reality to me. I'm standing here because I was once a prisoner of conscience. As you look at me and listen to me, please remember the often repeated truth that one prisoner of conscience is one too many. Those who have not yet been freed, those who have not yet been given access to the benefits of justice in my country, number much more than one. Please remember them and do whatever is possible to effect their earliest unconditional release.
Well, let's go live now to Oslo, and we can speak to the BBC's Mike Wooldridge. Mike, we heard Aung San Suu Kyi there reflecting on her past, but this was as much about Burma's present and its future, wasn't it?
Very much so, and I think that what she managed to convey very powerfully really was both the experience of being under house arrest for all of those years, for at least 15 years, and indeed, of course, to recognise that many people incarcerated in prison in much tougher conditions than her own. That experience, plus also the impact of the awarding of this Nobel Peace Prize to somebody in her position, not just in Burma, but around the world. And then on top of that, drawing on all that experience, also making it very topical in her call for all remaining prisoners of conscience, the people she said now, today, most liable to be forgotten now that the most high-profile detainees have been released, for pressure to be increased for them to be freed as well.
We heard also from the head of the Nobel Committee, and I guess you're there in Oslo, the sense to which awarding her that Nobel Peace Prize actually gave impetus to democracy in Burma.
Absolutely, that's certainly what they would argue, and they say that as a consequence of that, the fact that she's come here today and delivered this speech, if you like, almost 21 years late, this is, in their view, one of the great moments of Nobel history. Now, obviously, they're hoping that this will all have a lasting influence, not only the impact that they would argue that it has had in eventually securing her release, the fact that she's now playing a part in Burmese politics, in Parliament herself, but also that this will have a wider impact around the world. Now, that obviously remains to be seen, but Aung San Suu Kyi has in fact now come on to the stage behind me to speak to a wider public here, and of course she, from Norway, continues her tour of Europe, going on to Ireland and to Britain and to France. And I think she'll be very much hoping that she is able to maintain the kind of level of attention, not just for her as an individual, certainly not that, I think, would be how she would see it, but for the need for the world to engage much more fully, she would say in a transparent manner to try to support progress towards democracy in her country. That's obviously what she hopes to achieve during the rest of this Europe tour.
Okay, Mike Wooldridge, thanks very much. Welcome back to this BBC World News special on Aung San Suu Kyi, giving her Nobel Peace Lecture nearly 21 years after she was awarded the prize. She has been speaking at the town hall in the Norwegian capital, Oslo. There's some pictures from the ceremony today. Aung San Suu Kyi, I think we can see just there, arriving earlier on. Well, before she spoke, she sat down with the BBC's Fergal Keane in Oslo, and he asked her what it's like to be out of Burma after 2 decades.
I'm afraid a very frivolous thought has come into my head. What I find most striking about the world outside is that there's so many different kinds of light switches and bathroom fitments, and that's terribly confusing for me. But the warmth of the people of the countries I've visited, this has meant most to me.
Next week you go to Britain, which of course was such a huge part of your life as a young woman, and I'm wondering what you feel about going.
I'm looking forward to it, very simply. I want to see old friends again and to rediscover old places where I've been happy.
Is it tinged with sadness as well?
I hope not. I hope it will not be tinged with sadness.
When you look back on the years you've spent under house arrest, cut off from everybody really, do you ever regret the decision you made to stay in Burma?
No, I've never regretted it, because I think the decision that not just I alone, but my colleagues made to continue with our struggle is beginning to pay off.
Even with all the pain that's involved for you personally?
Not just for me, for others as well, and perhaps more for others than for me.
On engagement with Burma, a lot of British companies are now looking to invest. Can they do it with a clean conscience?
It depends on the way in which they do it. I spoke at the ILO of the need for democracy-friendly development growth, to invest in a way that will promote democracy in Burma, that will empower the people, that will bring in new players into the economic arena, not just the same old people who have been enjoying a privileged situation for years.
So in practical terms, if you're a major British company wanting, for example, to go into the energy sector, because Burma has huge reserves of oil and gas, what do you do in practical terms? Who do you get advice from?
Well, I did talk about that those who wanted to invest in the extractive industries in Burma should make sure that the Myanmar oil and gas enterprise MOGE signs up to the IMF
company.
Yes, IMF Code of Good Practices for Financial Transparency. Transparency is the key. Without transparency, there can be no accountability. And unless there's transparency, we can never tell whether these investments are going to benefit the people or to just the already privileged few.
So if you're Shell or BP, stay away from joint ventures with the national oil and gas company?
No, they should just tell the the MOGE to adhere to the IMF code, and that they themselves also will adhere to that code.
But broadly speaking, you're happy now to see British investment in Burma?
I would be happy to see ethical, responsible investment.
On the whole question of the transition, I wonder if you feel at all that too many people regard it as a done deal, when in fact the most difficult negotiations with the government lie ahead. Nothing is really settled at the moment.
Absolutely. This is what I keep saying. This is why I have been speaking out against what I call reckless optimism and calling for a bit of healthy skepticism.
You think there is reckless optimism?
Yes, and there is, and I called for healthy skepticism, which I must say was translated in the state newspapers as promoting the good health of negativity, which is a lot of nonsense. But I think we do need a bit of healthy skepticism, in the sense that we need to be aware of the many challenges that still lie ahead.
On that as well, you've seen in the past week terrible ethnic violence, 30,000 people displaced, and the President, your main negotiating partner, has warned that this could derail the transition. Do you share his fears?
We all share in such fears, in the sense that we are concerned that things should not get worse and worse. But I would also like to point out that if there had been rule of law in our country, these communal disturbances would not have come to such large proportions.
What do you mean by that?
Because the very first time a crime was committed, which was obviously going to have communal consequences, they should have taken action in accordance with the rule of law. If they had been able to do that and to satisfy all parties involved that justice was being done, that is to say, justice was not only been done, but if justice could have been seen to be done, I do not think that these disturbances would have grown to such proportions.
One of the other concerns that's been raised in recent weeks is that the huge focus on you distracts from the really sensitive question of negotiations. When you saw, for example, the President, your partner in negotiations, pulling out of an event in Thailand because he feared being upstaged by you.
I think this is a question you'll have to put to him. He didn't say that this is the reason why he did not go to
Pretty
Bangkok.
obvious, though, isn't it?
Well, you'll have to ask him.
But do you worry about the kind of superstardom that surrounds you now?
I never think of myself as a superstar. I always think of myself as the recipient of a lot of kindness and warmth, for which I'm grateful.
The general elections are due in 2015, and that is seen by most people as the moment of truth for a transition to full democracy. But nothing has been negotiated with the government. What, for you, is the key thing that you've got to achieve in negotiations soon?
We'll have to see what happens when we really start working in the National Assembly, how far we are able to go to bring about the changes that we think are necessary to ensure that 2015 will be the opening of the doors to a truly democratic country, not just government. I would like to say a democratic country, a country which enjoys the protection of democratic institutions.
Because right now you can't stand for the presidency because of having been married to a foreigner. Isn't that the case?
Yes.
So how soon are you going to have that law changed?
I do not know. We have said that one of the main requirements for Burma is amendments to the Constitution. So we'll have to see how long it takes for us to amend the Constitution. People keep talking about 2015, but the really important years are now, before 2015. If we wait until 2015 to see what's going to happen, it'll be too late. We've got to start trying to make 2015 the kind of year we want it to be.
Because there are people who say that the NLD, have been naive. The government is leading you up the garden path. It's got you into Parliament as a minority, and it's going to keep you there.
No, they can't keep us there against our will. If we feel that we can best serve the people in Parliament, we stay in Parliament. We decided to run for the by-elections because we thought that we could serve the people better. We will, of course, be carrying on with our extra parliamentary activities as we have been doing for the last 24 years. But at the same time, we will be expanding our activities to include Parliament.
Aung San Suu Kyi speaking to Fergal.
Where she has formally accepted the Nobel Peace Prize she won 21 years ago. Suu Kyi had been under house arrest since 1991, and prevented from leaving Myanmar by its military government. In her acceptance speech, she said Myanmarese refugees and political prisoners should not be forgotten. She also called for people to work towards peace.
Absolute peace in our world is an unattainable goal, but it is one towards which we must continue to journey, our eyes fixed on it as a traveler in a desert fixes his eyes on the one guiding star that will lead him to salvation. Even if we do not achieve perfect peace on earth, because perfect peace is not of this earth, common endeavors to gain peace will unite individuals and nations in trust and friendship and help us to make our human community safer and kinder.
Let's speak to Jonah Hull, who's been following events in Oslo. And Jonah, it was quite a poignant moment all in all, wasn't it?
Yes, absolutely. And a long time coming, Nick. More than 2 decades, of course, since Aung San Suu Kyi was actually awarded the Nobel Peace Prize in 1991. It was collected on her behalf at that time by her husband and 2 sons. She was under house arrest. She was afraid that if she left the country, she wouldn't be allowed back into the country. And extraordinary, really, when you think that at that moment in time, she'd already achieved and done so much in her struggle against the military rulers in Myanmar, and yet there was still 16 years of the past 22 years to come in which she would continue to live in isolation and in one form of detention or another. Poignant as well because in the last year or so or two, real political reforms have begun to happen in her country, in Myanmar, also known, of course, as Burma. A nominally civilian government in place for the first time in 50 years, although still backed by the military. Aung San Suu Kyi, very careful here to point out on her arrival in Norway, and she will continue to do it throughout this European tour, that there is a lot of work still to be done, and she will continue to work for democracy in Myanmar, even as these reforms evolve that have allowed her to have her freedom of movement reinstated and to be here in Oslo, finally delivering this lecture. She was described by the chairman of the Nobel Committee in introductory remarks before she spoke as an outstanding example of the power of the powerless.
Yeah, she's become quite an iconic figure around the world, isn't she? And indeed in Myanmar itself. And to what degree will people there be looking to her with hope for the future?
Well, you have to wonder, don't you? That word icon is a word she is said to despise, as is the word saint, or both of them often associated with her, as they have been for other people, the likes of Nelson Mandela and Mahatma Gandhi, and she's associated with those names as well. A very humble person she is, not a natural political figure. She didn't take to politics naturally. She is the daughter of a famous father of the nation, a pro-independence figure. She was sort of thrust into the limelight as the head of the opposition when she returned to the country in 1988 to look after her sick mother. Well, given all that's happened in the intervening period of time, she is the opposition leader. Her party is very popular. She's very popular, and one does have to wonder whether the sort of path of struggle that has led up to this point may be followed by a path towards leadership, but she's certainly not being drawn on that point. She says only that she will continue to work tirelessly, as she has done, for democracy in Myanmar.
All right, Jonah, thanks very much indeed. That's Jonah Hull reporting there from Oslo.